What if the biggest thing missing from modern chiropractic isn't science, but purpose? Hi there, I'm Greg Venning. Welcome to The Questing Chiropractor, the podcast that helps you find deep meaning in your practice so you are inspired, where you can create structures that set you free so you can change the world one person at a time and enjoy the profits that come from that. And today, Nimrod and Matt Doyle are going to have a deep conversation about why some chiropractors grow through uncertainty, build incredible teams, and create practices that feel deeply aligned, while others burn out, lose direction, or slowly disconnect from why they started in the first place. In this episode, Nimrod sits down with Matt, who's a chiropractor educator, researcher, and PhD candidate, to explore the deeper foundations of chiropractic success: authenticity, philosophy, purpose, adaptability, and human connection. If you've ever felt the tension between systems and soul, or structure and freedom, or philosophy and modern science in practice, well, this episode will clarify a lot. Listen to understand why authenticity is one of the biggest drivers of long-term practice success, and listen to discover how great chiropractors use structure and philosophy together instead of treating them as opposites. As always, as you're listening, if you think that a colleague or a friend might benefit from this, please send it on to them. Consider giving us up to a 5-star rating or subscribe if you're on YouTube. Enjoy. Welcome to the Questing Chiropractor podcast. We help you grow as visionary, vital, and capable chiropractors who are always on. We do things differently as we help to elegantly awaken your innate wisdom within. We help you create robust, predictable, and trustworthy practices that serve oceans of people and yet still have free time for yourselves and your families. We use neuroscience to deliver better business results so that you can get greater, deeper, and more effective impact in more ways. We are Questing Chiropractors, and this is our story.
So really excited for today's podcast chat. I'm here with Matt Doyle, who I have known for quite a few years through amazing work that he has been doing for our profession in Australia and abroad. We've kind of followed each other's geographical careers for a while. You graduated in Oz, and you were in Britain for a while, and then back in Oz. And I know that obviously we cross paths many times through the Australian Spinal Research Foundation, which you're now formally a board member on. And you're practicing in Queensland. You've been traveling on the road for a while. You're now down in the Adelaide College of Chiropractic, all over the place, buddy, and also doing a PhD amongst all that. So welcome to chatting today.
It's a pleasure to chat with like-minded people.
Yeah. Fantastic. So I want to jump first into the PhD topic that you're doing, because I find it hugely interesting and curious. And then we'll go into a couple of other directions, if it's okay with you.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
I, from your own perspective, and before we look at what your PhD is actually about, how would you describe what chiropractic is?
Well, it's optimize the expression of life through enhanced adaptability. That's sort of that's the overarching picture, and then you can take that in many, many ways. We have the specific focus in terms of chiropractic practice, where the detection and correction of variable subluxation, and there's so many things in and around that. So that sort of gives big picture down to like nitty gritty straight away, right? You can take that however you want. If you want to take a chiropractic direction into how did that reflect in practice? Or you have to understand the philosophy and you build the skill sets. You have that triad that allows us to, express who we are authentically as individuals and as chiropractors to then help the people that come to see us for their purposes. So being able to fold that story of what's important to them around what we can offer them and give them a picture of something that's greater than what they already have, in a very stepped out process. I think that's a critical part in terms of what is chiropractic, because that's where the rubber meets the road. There's layers to that then that go beyond, what you your artistic expression of chiropractic. It goes into your ethical application of that into your politics. And well, does that mean you support research foundations? Does that mean you support your national associations? Does that mean you write letters to the editor about stuff that you find interesting in the current zeitgeist of the world of chiropractic in politics and literature? There's just lots of layers that then builds onto, but it really comes back to that optimizing health of an individual through a life experience clearer of subluxation, and then it flows from bum down and inside out to all the other parts there.
Beautiful, beautiful. All right, I think we can stop the podcast there. You just encapsulated absolutely everything in the first response. Tell me, first of all, you're teaching students letters to the editor. No one does that anymore. Seriously?
So I was having this conversation with level 2 students this week, and it was such a cool thing to be able to reflect on. Like, the presentation is talking about the research process, and once you've submitted things there, what's your responsibility as an author? And part of that is responding to peer review and resubmissions. And then once papers are published, then there's the opportunities for people to condone, critique, applaud, challenge, offer insight to what you've produced in the evidence base, and that sometimes can be letters to the editor. So I think most of the demographic of the learners I was talking to this week probably had never looked at a letter to the editor. But I think it's great too. And something like the Asia Pacific Chiro Journal has really encouraged more of that professional discourse where you just get a bit more charged. Like, I remember when we were students, the Australian Chiropractor used to have really quite vibrant commentary and letters in there. And I think I like to see that emerging again, because it just, conflicts clarify things, and forcing yourself to write something, makes you clarify the thought process you're having. You might be having this dissonance about something that you're like, I'm raging against that, or that's an amazing topic. But then having to go through that methodical process of putting, pen to paper or typing something, really, I think that's beneficial for you as the person. And then it gives an opportunity for constructive professional discourse.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've won my heart there. I mean, I'm someone who loves to write and write in long form, unlike dictating a short text message to something full of emojis or whatever. But it absolutely clarifies my mind. When I sit down and I have to really work through my own thoughts in that way. I do wonder how much that art is being lost in this new generation, and maybe we'll talk about some of those gaps with this new generation. But just on an aside on that, would you say that the researchers within our profession are open to healthy discussion and critique in light of actually progressing research and knowledge and evidence forwards?
My optimistic answer is absolutely. Yeah. I find with a lot of those things, and this was one of the things I loved of a student with WCCS, was the opportunity for people with quite sometimes different perspectives on chiropractic and what was appropriate and what was not appropriate and what they thought chiropractic was those, collegial environments where you can get together and have a cup of tea or a beverage and have a discussion around that. I found, and I think creating those sorts of opportunities, particularly for researchers, but for chiropractors in general, like that, gathering together provides opportunity for far more productive discourse around, particular research topics. I saw some of that in action, say at WFC in 2023 on the Gold Coast. Like you could see some of the European authors who published papers that at a systematic review level or a meta-analysis level of randomized controlled trials, that was their outcomes were saying that specificity was not important. Like you could manipulate a thoracic spine to get some lumbar pain relief or vice versa. And then you had some of the New Zealand research group providing the before their published papers were out, and evidence around the impact of the specificity of targeting a segment of clinical interest, a subluxation, with an activator, and what that did to the prefrontal cortex versus targeting a segment in the neck that was not subluxated, and what that didn't do to the prefrontal cortex. So like there was this really quite, what could have been even a more charged discussion about that, but because it was in the context of a presentation and questions, like there was an element of like the people in the room were part of that milieu that helped that conversation be a useful professional one, as opposed to potentially leaning more into the extremes of the biases that could have come out of that discussion and been a bit more of an argument. So like those opportunities to get together, I think are really good. You know, the ACRAC in the US, the Research Educator Conference is on next weekend. So like the big tent event is here in Adelaide that the ACA is running in August. So yeah, those are great opportunities for researchers to get together and look at other people's work and hopefully have some constructive conversation. Because like, and I think this is an important thing too. Like I got something beneficial out of that discussion in that it made me reflect on, as a chiropractor I've always targeted specific patterns of subluxation with specific testing to deliver a specific force so that adjusting thrust was accepted by the body for the body to adjust. You know, there was very much a process to that. And the concept that, a meta-analysis was saying specificity didn't matter doesn't reflect my lived experience as a practitioner. However, like when some of the things that can be of use to that would say, well, maybe if someone's got a screaming hot low back and you do something a bit further away from that, then that may have something from a central point of view that does help that person at that point in time manage function and pain. So like there's always positives and negatives and things that you can take from that from whatever part of life, but that's from a literature sort of reflection.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, it really calls for us, first of all, to meet up in person because, things happen in that magic emergent space that just don't happen otherwise. And also for us to be open and curious and, really keep investigating with that desire to move things forwards rather than to stay defensive about where we are. So this really leads beautifully onto the topic of your PhD. And I started asking about what's chiropractic to you, and you're looking at this from the student's perspective quite a bit. So how are you opening up your own exploration as a result of some of the things that you've learned already through your PhD? And maybe you can introduce the topic of your mixed methods research that you're doing through your PhD.
Yeah, well, that's a great question. Oh, so many directions to take it. One of the things I did a lot more of, and have done a lot more in the last 20 years, is looking at the care of like babies, children, pregnancy. Yeah. And part of the drive for that was when I graduated, I had a decent level of understanding of how to take care of kids. I'd done some of Neil Davies' work. We had some really good kids chiropractic presenters at RMIT in the early 2000s. But I did want to dive into that area more because as I looked at the philosophy of chiropractic, if you understand the impact of subluxation on a person's existence, that it would make sense to take care of humans across the lifespan. And so understanding more about kids care made sense. And once I started going into the higher education space, working at Barcelona for a year, working at CQU, going through the grad cert and tertiary ed I did, I found it fascinating when you look at pedagogical and andragogical literature and the nature of how people learn and the quite vast array of approaches that you can take as an educator to help learners, scaffold through a process of going from no understanding to, a baseline understanding to a graduate level to then an expertise level was really interesting. And I found it within that literature, there was there seemed to be a lot more cumulatively constructive approaches that those different methodologies use. And that really resonated with me from a philosophical understanding with chiropractic. Our nature of existence is based on the cumulative constructive and cumulative destructive, things that occurred in our existence and how we can adapt to those. So the journey of the PhD really was about, well, if I think philosophy is important for a chiropractor and understanding the traditional principles, and then that helps people take care of people across the spectrum of life, that it would be useful to dive into a really deep level of how chiropractic philosophy in chiropractic education is experienced. And then I think in our profession, a mixed methods approach are really useful, and they're starting to become far more utilized. We're seeing more qualitative research papers published in the profession, particularly in the last 5 years. So I think that mix of the quantitative database, analysis of statistics is still important in many, many ways. When you look at clinical interventions, when you look at, like I did survey work with part of mine, but then also getting that lived experience of the student as an early grad, as a first year student to a final year student to an early graduate. Like what's their lived experience of the process they'd gone through. And the thing that I was interested in was, well, how do you construct that journey from an early stage to a late stage learner into an early stage graduate, where you're then charging fees for service based on your profession, which has underlying philosophical principles. So like that's the overview as to why I'm doing the PhD in that mixed methods area. And my hope is that then can be something beneficial to chiropractic education globally, and possibly, more broadly to education in sort of professions that have a clinical sort of focus, midwifery, osteopathy, traditional Chinese medicine. How do you frame the things that make you unique or of specific value as a profession? Because we have APRA, right? Like there's all these professions. Each of those has something that makes them what they are. And how do you flow that through an educational process to get a great outcome for the graduate within that professional space?
Yeah, beautiful. Let me just expand on some of those terms. So we have chiropractors from all around the world listening to this. First of all, APRA is the Australian body that looks after registered health professions, not only chiropractic, but also medicine, physiotherapy, all the ones you'd expect included in there. Mixed methods, from my understanding, and please correct me, is where you would collect data that could be objectified, so looked and analyzed and quantified, but you also bring in some of the story of some of the people that are relevant to that. So in your case, you're looking at the students and their subjective experience, so that the data is not only cold and dissected and reduced, but also is beautifully intertwined with, as you said, a lived experience, some values and meanings, and personal subjective richness that comes from the student themselves in this case. And my understanding of where you're going with your PhD is looking at, well, how does all of that relate to the philosophical perspective or a direction that a specific student may take in their understanding of chiropractic in those various years, including newly graduated. Is that correct?
Yeah, no, that's a pretty good summary. And I would think there's a few points to sort of contextualize around there. Quantitative data can really be, it could be the hard nuts and bolts of pain scales or oswestries in chiropractic, or like the great research work that Imran Manjid and Yazi and the research group have done, looking at physiological like biomarkers after 12 weeks, 3 times a week of subluxation focused chiropractic care. So that there's a lot of quantitative data that comes out of just the numbers, looking at interleukins and cortisol levels and those sorts of things. So, but you can also have quantitative data from surveys. So the surveys that I did were asking people about what they thought about stuff. What was their was there a difference between disease and dis-hyphenese? Like that's a really important nuance to understand in the philosophy of chiropractic. Where do they think the profession's going? What was their worldview like? How do they approach health? Do they think it's all just we're made with the sum of what we are, or we're more than the bits that we are? There's some of those questions you can get some quantitative data because you use Likert scales to derive that. And then the qualitative work really is and this is what I've loved about it, like the qualitative work, like there's an approach to do it that makes it rigorous. And there's been the last 20 years, there's been quite the development in the, enhancing the methodological rigor associated with qualitative work, and particularly things like that I've used, like sending structured interviews. So you've got consistency with the questions you ask, and you have a capacity for the person to explore more around it. Like talking about concepts, where would someone think they place themselves if there's a spectrum between materialism and vitalism? Like there's getting the isms right, not necessarily mechanism versus vitalism. Like that's not quite the argument. It's a different philosophical approach.
Absolutely.
There. And what's their experience? I mean, do they understand, what did they think they got in terms of chiropractic philosophy in their chiropractic education? Who were people, were there people that were of influence to them within the program, without the program? How do they feel about their experience there? Were they happy with what they got? Were there things that they'd love to see improved, and were anything else that they'd like to comment on? So it gives you a structured approach to get this really rich subjective data that explores that lived experience.
Yeah. Fantastic. And so much richness there. I'm looking forward to reading it. I know that you published something about the survey tool itself, and you also just published something along with Mike Marinas and with Joyce Miller about chiropractic and for kids in the survey that was there, which was really interesting. About what I found interesting there was that the conclusion seemed to suggest that the higher level of education in that specific field meant better results and more safety and more nuances around the techniques that you apply. So it really is suggesting that when we become more masters at one specific area, then we get better at it, which is not surprising, but also it's better for all involved, for in this case for the kids and the parents and the family, the community and the practice and the profession itself. So taking that sort of line of thought around what you were just talking about with your PhD and the level of understanding around philosophy, what would you say would be key around that for a new grad to be successful in practice?
Well, I think before we started this, you asked about what are some of the key sort of things I'd love people to get from a chat, and like the two things that really stick out are authenticity and purpose. So I think if you're a chiropractor, part of that process, it's very appropriate to have a very grounded and solid understanding of the traditional principles of chiropractic. There can be choices as to how you apply those in practice, but I think it's very important as a profession that we understand those principles, where they came from. And like there's some really interesting recent papers that have just been published around the kind of evolution of the publication process around the philosophy of chiropractic. That from DD's time up to the work that Simon Senzon's now publishing. So that's like that. When Men's just published that article, it's really interesting. So I think understanding those principles is important, and having I think understanding those principles and then looking at how that reflects in your own life and where congruences and incongruences are. Helps understand the, in practice, I have always found that being authentic to who you are as a person, along with what your filter is in terms of being a professional and a chiropractor, that authenticity is one of the most powerful things you can do across your life to be successful and have fulfillment in what you do in life. particularly as it applies to practice. People get that. It's a BS meter that they just understand. And then I think that leads into finding purpose within what you're doing. For many years, I had a real focus on family-based care, seeing kids in practice and helping other chiropractors build skill sets to be able to take care of the family. And that comes from an understanding of the philosophy, and then, that helped drive the purposeful part of that chapter of my existence. Which sort of leads into the chapter we're in now, which is going into more full-time education and sort of that giving back to the profession and in helping the next generation understand their basic skill sets and their reasons for what they do, and helping them with tools to be able to critically analyze the information coming in and process it, and then make appropriate, authentic decisions with that.
Yeah. Beautiful. Authenticity and purpose, so strong to plant those flagpoles really well and keep them as a foundation. Looking back at your recent time in practice, because I know you've shifted now into being in Adelaide in education, do you remember a moment when you knew that your authenticity was being tested, or maybe that you'd even reached a level of slight incongruence that was a pain point?
It's interesting ones. There's times we're in Europe where we did a lot of Groupon things, which were great for an enhanced new person flow.
Yeah.
But the process associated with that sort of had some bits that, at times didn't sit as well. So that was an interesting process to work through in terms of the value associated with what we do as professionals and as chiropractors, and being careful to not degrade that. So that was an interesting time where it was challenged. I mean, COVID times were fun and games for all. What we found, we had our own practice, we had our property. Our practice grew for Megan and I through that time. So, and it's the same thing that, along with some of the challenges when we're in Europe, I was practicing in Glasgow, which was, the second biggest financial center in Europe when the GFC happened. And that was, at that point in time in my career, that was the biggest growth I had, in practice.
Right.
Just volume wise. So the two times in my 2 decades of practice where the world's gone,
crisis
in interesting ways with GFC and with COVID. I've seen growth in my practice, and again, I think that comes down to authenticity and purpose. Like, if you're communicating the value of chiropractic as a way of enhancing your adaptive capacity to deal with the stress of life, then you provide a safe place, a regulated space where they can be open and express, what's going on to their reality, and get support to be able to deal with those stresses better, whether it's emotional stresses because they just, the Royal Bank of Scotland just laid off 200 workers and that's where they're working, or businesses going under, or, the stresses of all the things associated in COVID times in and around health. So, I think that was a real learning, and I'm glad that earlier on in my career and just consistently through that, when challenging things have come up, it's having that moment and space and people around you. I've got an amazing wife who's in a very good filter and structure to he's great at calling BS on things, and having primary relationships that are strong and authentic, and respecting the individuals in that allows for something special to come out of that and growth to come out of that. But having people around you in those challenging times that can be sounding boards for decisions that you make and challenges that you have, sometimes you may not need the answers from people that you talk to, but it's the act of talking to and verbalizing, kind of like we're talking about writing stuff down, that allows for those those sort of authentic answers to emerge out of that discussion.
Thoughts. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I know you were working with Megan, who's your wife, or your chiropractor. Did you have others in the team during COVID? Did you have CAs or associates?
Yeah. So we had CAs. We had multiple CAs through that whole time. So one of those. Before COVID, we had an amazing CA for a lot of years who is now a chiropractor. One of our CAs who joined us during COVID times is studying at the Australian Chiropractic College.
Nice.
So
nice.
It's
Impact and legacy,
nice,
Matt. It's beautiful.
Well, look, I'm not here without wonderful Mark Fossils.
Yeah.
So he was my first chiropractor. I'm obviously biased. That's a great thing in research. Being able to declare bias. And it's actually a really important part of qualitative research, if it's done well, is having a clear discussion around your bias, because you bring that to an interview and a discussion and an interpretation of literature. And it doesn't invalidate it, but it helps frame the information you can transmit in a more authentic fashion.
Yeah, absolutely. We're human beings and we all bring a bias. And if we don't think we bring a bias, that's our own bias. So tell me, I'm curious with the team, and maybe looking at also where teams may be at now, what would you say, what was your experience with your own team, but also what would you suggest to chiropractors out there now in terms of helping people in their team, associates or CAs, develop their own authenticity and purpose?
Great question. There's an element of that. Look, I love Mark's way showing, nature. That's one of the things that I got from being around his practices for a very long time. Having clarity of purpose for the practice, having your mission and vision statements, things that crystallize the reason that you are doing what you're doing in that community, I think are really critical to that. And that was always something that we did in the hiring process, was going through, this is what we do. This is who we are. These are the people we take care of. This is why we do it. This is what we love about it. And if someone resonates with that, then that's a great first step. And you want to be really clear about that too, because if they don't resonate with that, then taking on someone into your team, especially in small teams like most chiropractic teams are, that can be really detrimental. So having I think structures in place to particularly in the hiring process, we found was super important to filter. And some of the simplest things of this is the advert for a chiropractic assistant. You've got to call us between this time and this time on this day, this day, this day.
Yeah.
And if you can't make that phone call to have a quick chat, most chiropractors, me included, more quadrant 1-4s. We're big picture. We love the vision. And sometimes don't sweat the small stuff quite as much, which is why we need someone who's amazing, who's detail oriented. And if in your advertising process, you don't give them something that really is detail oriented, like call at a time with this number between these hours, when you've got someone who's 14 visits into a camp plan, but missed a couple of visits and had stuff with the kids, they may not just understand the importance and value of following the structures and the protocols and the processes you have in place to help support that person on their journey. And, that's someone who may not get the full value to chiropractic at that point that they deserve.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So I'm keen, to bring it around to some of the experience that you have in your teaching, but also through your PhD, where you are looking at this mixed methods, which looks at, the data that is quantitative, but also the story that is qualitative. How would you actually help a chiropractor know through data and, through quantitative and qualitative means if someone resonates with their purpose? You mentioned, one of the little tests of, can you follow instructions in a bit of detail, but what else would you say is both quantitative and qualitative way to help understand, does this person resonate with our vision and mission?
That's a really interesting question. So the thing that came up to me there, and this isn't necessarily a research-based observation, but then, we would at regular times, for the people we took care of, as well as our team, go through like DiMartini's value determinants, like having some sort of methodological process where people can then think about what their values are. Like, that's something that I did with the team multiple times over multiple years, because that value stack for individuals changes based on, what chapter of life they're in. So that was a really, like, having tools to be able to help someone understand their values, and then sometimes they won't be cognizant of what they're focusing on, they're putting their time and their talents and their energy towards.
Yeah.
And having just, again, writing down something in black and white that helps frame where they're putting their energy, helps them understand their values, which from a practice point of view is super important, because if those values are really not to do with helping the community, helping improve people's sort of life goals, their journey, it may just not be things that are resonating with the vision and mission of the practice. And that's important to understand, because you can help them find other ways to express their life, which may not be in your practice.
Yep, absolutely. And that's coming back to purpose and authenticity, right? And if it's not authentic, it's not aligned, that's not going to resonate. It's going to go to shit. It's really going to fall apart. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, go on.
Well, I think the few CAs we hired over the years, that because we had a good handbook of the processes required from the first phone call to coming through the door, to being at the reception desk, to being stepped through their initial forms, to being walked through into their consult, to being coming out of consults, to reports, to going to the adjustatorium. So there was like all these detailed processes that allow the right person to be able to express who they are without having to worry about the foundational structure. Like, the structure is there. And if people struggle with that structure in that early stage, particularly if you got, it's a busy practice and there's a lot of things going on, we found there's a couple of the people who started working for us who pretty soon we had a conversation with them, and sometimes it was us and sometimes it was them saying, is this really working for you? And then I'd say, this is not where I want to be. And being okay with that outcome is important too, because everyone has their journey. But having those structures in place to run the practice well, we're really critical in helping you have the right people come on board, and find out if them being on board was helping the ship sail faster and further and longer, or were they adding buckets of water into it and pulling down an extra sail.
Or creating more holes in the hull, right? And, I would echo that in so many ways. First of all, I think not only for CAs, but also associates, you need to be able to master the structure, to be able to be liberated from it, to connect on a human-to-human level. But it's the structure that not only gives you the foundation for that, the ability to do that, but it actually gives predictability to the whole practice. So if I don't know what my associates or my teams are doing in terms of structure, then it's just madness and chaos, right? It's just nothing's going to work. But if the structure becomes unconsciously competent, then we can all sail in a more beautiful way. And bring it back to chiropractic philosophy, structure leads to function. And we know that with the body, and it's true with our practice as well.
Well, like that, thinking of that, we want simplicity on the far side of complexity, right? And so you have to have those layers to give that structure so that a beautiful function can come out. One of the things that was great out of a couple of years ago, when there was still things going on about chiropractic in kids, so we had the opportunity of having the Australian government's opposition, so Shadow Minister for Health, come to our practice along with our local members of the National Parliament. And because we had the structure and function, our great team loaded that out last hour or so of practice with our, like, just people and families that were passionate and loved what we do. So we had I wasn't practicing that day. So we had our associate, who's now bought our practice. We had an associate and Megan running, and they're busy. And I was in there. There's one or two kids that I adjusted. So I had these politicians coming in, observing the process with consent, which led to some amazing discussions about, and this minister was loved talking about the concept of, she brought up, we don't really have a healthcare system. It's really more of a sick care, like treating system. So, so that these are, and the way that my team was able to float between the ministers and the families and keep the kids managed and engaged, and allowing, like, parents would wait for a little bit of their moment to chat. And like, there was just like, there was some magic that happened there, and that wouldn't have happened without, having spent the time or the complexity of having systems and procedures that allow the practice to run well, so that you can build this beautiful chaos that allows some more growth beyond that. And hopefully that helps the capacity for our, many generations in Australia to be able to look after the whole family.
Yeah. Beautiful, beautiful. And that really leads me into the last couple of questions that I wanted to go. One is, you said originally that chiropractic is the optimal expression that allows people to adapt. And we've been talking a lot about purpose and authenticity. So very briefly, how do you think that allowing the optimal expression actually allows people to live a more authentic and on-purpose life? What's the connection there?
I think there's, you talk about the 3 T's, traumas, toxins, and autosuggestion, right? There's the things that, if you have more authenticity in the different aspects of your life, then that will allow you to express all of those different aspects of your life. And, whatever sort of approach you might use to optimizing your existence, there's, physical, mental, social, spiritual, financial, health, family, if there's more authenticity in your what you say and what you do, then that expresses in further levels of, I think, enjoyment and understanding on each of those different areas of your life. And what we find, and I found in a lot of people in practice, was their physical things that stopped them doing the stuff they loved, at times could be representations of some of the contradictions in what they wanted to be doing, what they were doing. It might be that they had a belief structure around what they were doing in work, or how that was impacting their capacity to be a mother or a father, which then led to, working more, being upset more. So then their emotional state's not as good. We know from low back pain, your job satisfaction is one of the highest risk factors. So then you tend to get more low back issues. Or it might be that they strain something and they can't lift something at work. So there's all these reflections of people's values, and whether there's contradictions in those values, which then tend to reflect in, we live in a very physical world of sorts. Like the way the Western world particularly brings people up is very physical. We're less connected with that sort of emotional or spiritual nature of things. So things that people often come to us with are physical stuff that's messing up what they can do that they love doing. So I think that's probably one of those key reflections on where a lack of authenticity in areas of life causes destruction, which is reflected in often a physical thing that messes them doing something they sometimes it's a little whisper of that's a problem. Sometimes it's a massive hammer and they blow their back out completely, but that gives them an opportunity to, and you have, as the practitioner, the opportunity to help them with the fire that's happening right now.
Yes.
But out of that, you get to help create this beautiful thing that allows them to express, themselves better and look at their reality and how they're interacting with things.
Yeah, beautiful, Matt. So beautifully stated. And, just really seeing that these feedbacks from life, from the universe, from your body are actually messages of how to get better on the way. And so true, not only for the people we serve in our practice, but also for us as chiropractors, right? If life is shaking you in a small or a big way, don't ignore it. Realign yourself with a more authentic and more on-purpose life. So looking forwards for you, what are you wanting for the future, for yourself, for your family, for chiropractic education, for our profession, for the world? All of that in one nutshell.
I love that. Well, it's like I've got young kids, so like part of that is creating a work-life balance where we still have, connection as kids go through from being young kids into tweens and teens, like, so there's this whole journey that we get to go through now,
Yeah.
making sure we're all well adjusted so that the family unit, grows well through all the challenges that come along with that.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to an amazing decade or two here in South Australia with the processes and the evolution of the Australian Chiropractic College. Like, I'd love to see, I expect, and it's already happening, you've got great graduates coming out of ACC, and you'll see more and more of that, and there'll be an evolving impact of those graduates as they go then into leadership positions in their community as chiropractors, and then within their profession, and their impact on boards and regulatory bodies, and some will end up in parliament, and but they'll have a framework that understands chiropractic, that looks at the importance of the synergistic acting of all aspects of life on a society. So then we look at, improving, the societal approaches to health that we have in Australia, and that leads into, how can we impact that on a global stage? I always joke with my brother about it because he's a chiropractor as well. And once we're into our 70s, we'll have to look at, how do we do low force adjusting in Mars base or moon base, or in cruising around the universe. DeMartini would talk about galactic chiropractic, right? So
absolutely, galactic vision, Matt. Galactic vision.
If you're going to do a total adjustment in space, you kind of need to have some sort of management structure for dealing with physics.
Well, I think, if we're in space, we're going to have a whole lot of other tensions and stresses that may potentially be overwhelming us. For one, hopefully the Earth is still around. I guess just rounding this out, you're on such a great path, and I've always loved your keen desire to make a greater and greater impact and leave a bigger legacy as a result of what you're doing. And I'm deeply grateful for that, and the way that you're impacting people, future chiropractors, current chiropractors in all sorts of wonderful ways. One of the things we are really focused on at Quest is, we say our vision is to reconnect a myriad of people worldwide with chiropractic values, empowering them to continuously quest as they masterfully create the life of their dreams. For yourself, where you are at the moment, would you say you've been creating the life of your dreams?
Absolutely. Well, and I think, when I think of rounding out the conversation, I'm not here if Mark hadn't seen my father and helped him with his back stuff, but that became so much more than that. It's the animal chiropractor for 35 years he's been. As a vet, my brother and I are both practitioners, but also I think of we always want to understand our history, which is part of why I think the understanding philosophy is important, because that helps us, gives us guide rails and directions for how we evolve to the future. And where you and I in our practicing time frame, we're transitioning through where some of the giants that were in the profession have left. Jerry Clum passed away a few years ago. Guy Reekman passed away a few years ago. He was pivotal in the evolution of Quest. So understanding and making sure that, I think, as practitioners, as students, as people associated with chiropractic, spend some time looking at YouTubes and listening to audios of those people, your Jerry Clums and Guy Reekmans, Reggie Golds, those sorts of people.
Fred Barge.
And a lot of those people, I had the privilege of spending a little bit of time with. So I've still got a physical kind of connection. And when you Chris Kent, who was at Palmer, you talk about someone like that who's had such an impact on the profession and the things
who's still around, by the way.
Who's still around. I was listening to some of his history of his student involvement. So that understanding that history, and that's another direction that people can always reconnect with their profession and help. I think particularly so the Guy and Jerry, help connect people to purpose. They always have beautiful messages, and there's nuggets in every presentation I've ever heard those guys and talk of, and they were humble giants. Like I was, privileged to have my birthday dinner in San Francisco at Jerry's place one time. So he's saying me happy birthday with his family.
Yeah.
That's just like, that's like, I mean, I remember having dinner with Guy. I did making us drinks. Like they were giants in their profession, but they were still, they had a humbleness and a connectedness to them to be with the people they were with at that point in time. And more than anything, it doesn't matter what stage you're at in your career, like being with the person you're with at that point in time. If it's present time consciousness with a person on the table, or if it's me connecting with a student, having a discussion, or having this beautiful discussion right now, which with so many large words, is even amazing. So just being present is really important.
Yeah. I love it, Matt. I love it. I feel like we could go on for a long time. And I very much feel that you are not only strongly on purpose, but it's such an amazing purpose to, better the optimal expression of people's adaptability, so they're living a more on purpose and authentic life. What a gift to our profession and to the world as well. And I'm really grateful for what you're doing with the students at ACC, at ASRF, and with your PhD, and continuously to make an impact and leave a legacy for sure. So thank you so much, Matt, and for all you do and for your time today as well.
Appreciate that. I love and respect and appreciate what you're doing with Quest and all the people associated with it. It's a wonderful family, and we need people to be doing the sort of work you're doing, because that just serves our profession amazingly.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a joy. Thanks, Matt.